right, this is Masters of Podcasting. I'm Conley.
I'm Melissa.
And today we're going to be talking about Episode 8, Love and Marriage.
This one was a dark horse for me. I forgot how good this one was because you get the emotional climax of last episode, and then there's this one, and you keep expecting there to be this big blowout sex scene like in the last one, and it never happens. So when you're watching it the first time around, you're kind of going, like, what? And then you rewatch it, and it turns out to be really good because all this stuff happens. Lots of stuff happens.
Yeah, it was a surprise to me how much stuff happened in this one episode, just because this is one that I, in the back of my mind, was thinking was spread across two. So I kept thinking, we're not going to get to the part where, we see Barton and Dale and, Libby finding out that she's pregnant again. Oh, no, wait, that's the end of this episode. Okay.
Yeah, this one is, and it jumps around a lot, but it's jam-packed with little revelations.
Well, in my notes, I pretty much broke it down by couples, so I think that's probably the best way to approach this.
Great.
Let's start with Austin and Margaret ending their affair very awkwardly.
Yeah, it was nice that she took pity on him, but I felt sorry for her as a woman seeing that that's where it was going and being forced to play it out that way, kind of sacrifice her own feelings to basically save face for him.
Well, and although he was trying to play the part very well, he said stuff like, "That's a blow, I respect your decision," but it was almost like a monologue he had already memorized. So, he's saying all these things, but there's that level of detachment and that sense that the second he's done saying these words, he's going to be sprinting in the other direction.
Yeah, and I think he really did. I think he was fully aware that they were both play acting and, kind of trading each other's lines, especially when he saw her bag sitting under the bench.
Oh, yeah. I think they both knew that, let's call this what it is. We're trying to save face. We're, attempting to be mature about it, even though, obviously, it really breaks Margaret's heart. Austin is carrying around his own baggage of guilt.
It was strange to watch Margaret essentially go through her first real, truly honest sexual relationship and heartbreak, because she goes from talking to Austin in the train station into the bar where she meets Dale, and all of a sudden and not to invalidate her feelings or anything, but all of a sudden she presents herself to him as this worldly, heartbroken person, as if she has all this wisdom and knowledge, which, given his profession and who he is, his stature in the world, that's kind of ironic.
I thought it was telling, too, how she was trying to tell Dale, under the guise of being wise and an authority figure, she was trying to tell him, you think it will never be you. Your parents were in separate beds and in separate rooms, and you just know you're not going to have that kind of relationship, and then suddenly you end up there. And I just found it kind of funny in a dark way that she's trying to impart all this life wisdom to him, as if he's going to go out and find a girlfriend and apply all of this naturally, and yet here he is. We know that he's very gay.
I was kind of surprised, in a good way, that we got a little bit of backstory from Dale, because he could just serve as an accessory to Barton, but they really bothered to go in and give him hints of a background and give him a better sense of self-respect in this episode.
Yeah, I did appreciate them trying to fill in a few blanks on that front, because really, the fact that we buy Barton's relationship with Dale and they've only had, a handful of scenes together up to this point, that speaks of some strong writing for that particular arc, and I really do appreciate the fact that they try to develop that so vividly.
And they really did it very efficiently. It didn't require more than just a couple of lines, and they were very vague details that easily could have been, lies, but, I don't think they were.
Well, it didn't feel contrived in the way that some of these characters, like the Ethan and Vivian storyline, they did obviously had to spend a lot of time building that, but it has felt much more contrived, even though we spent much more time with Ethan and with Vivian than the Dale and Barton storyline does by contrast.
That's true. So speaking of, we should segue into Ethan and Vivian.
Okay, I have to point this out because I just figured this out tonight on the rewatch. But when Vivian is, in Ethan's apartment singing Love and Marriage to herself and being very Doris Day, childish, having these marriage fantasies. The line that she sings is, Dad was told by Mother, you can't have one, meaning love, without the other, meaning marriage. And that is literally what Margaret says to Barton not half an hour later in this episode.
Very true. This episode has some layers to it.
You know, maybe it's silly that I just now figured it out, but I don't care.
No,
I think it's great.
That's very insightful. I think the only thing that I took out of that was that it was really funny to me that he was following her around, kind of ducking and dodging her catching him, watching her like a serial killer, hunting her through the house, like peering around the corner and then ducking back when she turned around in the mirror. Meanwhile, she's got the spatula held up like a microphone, and she's looking at her hands to imagine how a wedding ring would look. And
yeah, she's in Bye Bye Birdie, and he's in Apocalypse Now. So
Vivian in her innermost girlish fantasies is in a Doris Day, Rock Hudson sex comedy.
What really was funny to me about both of them, but, you know, we see Vivian have this real childish moment and singing to herself and imagining how great it's going to be to get married. And then on the other hand, later in the episode, we have Ethan sort of describing his own childish marriage fantasies to Austin. Like, he's trying to lay out almost this logical argument for why he should be married and why it's time for him to be an adult and do this thing. And all of his reasons just sound crazy.
He's using conclusions as justifications. Like, he's got it backwards. He says men are more successful and happy when they're married, but it's not as a consequence of the act of marriage. It's because they have formed a partnership and because they are, you know, true partners and are together on a stronger level than just wanting to get married because that's, you know, some ideal fantasy.
Because it will make me more like the presidents.
All 30 whatever of them, 35.
His reasoning in particular made me laugh because, you know, you see both of them sort of constructing not even arguments for why they should be married, but just sort of thoughts and ideas. And then by the time they actually get to Ethan buying the ring and trying to propose to Vivian, he's just not good at this.
Well, neither one of them is.
No. You know, Ethan's not good at being romantic, and Vivian is doubly worse at trying to play it cool.
She just refuses to give him his moment because all of us... And it's not like she's one of those girls who marriage is all about the wedding ceremony and planning her big day like a princess. You know, she is excited about the whole being with Ethan thing, but she can't help but make the whole thing about her.
It's kind of funny because it's like she's preparing for a performance, you know, because he's telling her, he's trying to be kind of playful and say, hey, you know, I got us these dinner reservations, wear a dress, it's going to be cute. And she just goes into overdrive like some sort of Broadway diva about to have a moment. You know, should I have tea-length or floor-length? Should I have gotten a manicure? Should I have gloves? Is it an emerald cut? And Ethan's just like, oh my God, I don't know.
Should we go back and hit Barton and Margaret?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about their little date at the drive-in there?
Well, we don't. Does that comes after they have the conversation in the ladies' room and he yells at her?
That's right. Let's talk about that conversation first.
Okay, so she runs off to the ladies' room and he follows her in, and like you were saying earlier, it's interesting how in the previous episode, Margaret has Austin over to the house and she tells Barton to go to his room and close the door and not come out, and we're meant to assume as an audience that Barton's just going to be cool with this, that he's going to see past the fact that she is violating their marriage vows and just be okay with the fact that she's having an affair because his proclivities go in a different direction. But here he winds up, I guess, essentially screaming at her and being a complete hypocrite. Even in the sense, as far as she knows, he's been off having affairs with other women and she doesn't react to the inherent hypocrisy even in that. It's like it's okay on some level for him to go off and tomcat around with women, but it's definitely just not okay for her to go outside the marriage. She responds gracefully and she just gives him a handkerchief and walks out.
And it was interesting to me trying to parse out maybe what made him so upset about the fact that, you know, she is having this affair and then he's trying to make up all these excuses because he doesn't really seem to get mad until she sort of dispassionately is saying, Barton, I can't believe you would be with prostitutes. That's just so beneath you. I was almost wondering if he was crying over her non-reaction as much as he was over the fact that she's having an affair, because I couldn't tell if it was straight jealousy, this person that I love is actually cheating on me, or if it's just Barton being dismayed that maybe she doesn't love him as much as he thought she did.
I almost wondered if Barton sees Margaret the way the audience was kind of led to think of Barton from the previous episode. Like, he'd look at her and think, well, she wouldn't be having an affair. Of course she loves me. This is all internalized. Like, of course she'd be okay with it on some level. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him necessarily giving a lot of thought to, well, of course she'd want to have sex. Like, of course that's an important part of our relationship. I think he would just have pushed that so far from his mind just because of who he is and the fact that he is gay and hiding it. I think it just wouldn't even occur to him that, oh, maybe she has needs that are not being met in this marriage.
And maybe it's just the idea that he would lose her on some other fundamental level, like sex itself as an expression of love. And the fact that she's doing that with someone else. I don't know. It's funny the way the mind justifies, but I'm not sure that I totally understand Barton's internal workings there.
Well, I don't really think we're meant to, but I think it is supposed to be shocking, obviously, the amount of emotion that he displays over someone who he's in a platonic marriage with, maybe at best. He describes it as that they're the best of friends after 30 years.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cute, if you were thinking about any other couple who maybe had passion at the beginning that just faded. But I don't know, it struck me as very poignant, even though in the midst of all this lying and hypocrisy and just total, complete breakdown.
So then he gets the bright idea over breakfast alone to go upstairs and invite her to the movies. And he just charges on in.
Well, and I like how this was filmed because, he does charge in. It's so awkward because she's just sort of distracted, trying to get ready, and he's standing there like, do I say hello? Do I announce myself? Do I wait? What's going on?
Oh, no, see, I didn't get that at all. What I saw was him just, like, walking. It was almost like he didn't even notice. He was so narrowly focused on getting the thing done that she turned around and he was just like, oh, you're here. What, do you want to go out to movie tonight? It was like he had no concept of what she was doing.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt like the way it was filmed kind of hinted at that awkwardness, but like you said, obviously he's just sort of there to spit out the words and then I guess go back to breakfast by himself. It's not like he was afraid to see her naked, or maybe he was. So once we get to the drive-in, I love how snarky Margaret is with him, because even in the midst of this fairly awful time in their marriage, she has no reservations about just saying exactly what's on her mind.
Yeah.
Which is refreshing, I think, for this kind of storyline.
She is a very honest, straight shooter.
I'm just thinking of he's kind of trying to talk to her about how pretty she is, and she looks at him and she just says, do you know how many times in our marriage I've wondered if you're insane? You're being crazy. In the middle of their conversation, the whole time you can see that very passionate couple in the background just going to town, and then here's Barton and Margaret just like, okay.
Chastely touching lips a little, and then...
I think what really struck me was when she was talking to him about he didn't look at her body, and then she says, and yet your face was filled with such love. Just watching her try to understand that was very moving for me.
Did you want to talk about Austin and his wife and the way that he reacted to the breakup with Margaret?
Santa coming in March.
I liked that the camera followed his wife into the kitchen and gave her a line about how she knew damn well exactly everything that was going on, that had always been going on. This show does a service to its slightly more minor characters. Austin comes off in this episode is as a kind of comedic Midwestern Don Draper, is what I wrote down. I think he really only likes the beginnings of things, and he gets very skittish and scared when things get too real or too deep. He likes having stories about moments and then being able to walk away from them. I think we said this in a previous episode, I think he just kind of likes being a tourist in other people's lives.
Yeah, I agree. I think he also likes the gestures, too, that you're supposed to do in the beginning, because obviously poor Ethan is just lost in this whole idea of marriage as something that's supposed to be romantic. You know, he obviously can't put that into practice, and so here's Austin to sort of swoop in.
I did like that he knew which president had been a bachelor, like, off the top of his head. Like, secretly Austin thinks James Buchanan must have been a kick-ass president for not having been married. Like, that's his hero or something.
He just wants to be that guy.
He knew right away. He had that answer. But that did seem to be a kind of reset button on Austin as far as the study was concerned.
You mean because we didn't see him as part of the study this time?
Because he breaks it off the most recent, I guess you could put this in quotation marks, long-term relationship, or relationship that got too deep, and then he went off and had casual, anonymous, practically no strings attached sex with the shop girl. And then all of a sudden he's ready to spring back into it. You know, he gets back to that point where the woman is a trope, a figure, an archetype rather than a human being, and suddenly he's ready to go.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking was, you know, now that he's not gotten the real thing out of his system, but run away from something that was rooted in genuine feeling, he's back to his types and his sex kittens.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Lillian and Jenny for a minute.
Sure.
Obviously, this episode, they make great strides as far as their personal relationship, meaning they go from actively sniping at each other to sometimes sniping at each other and occasionally finding harmonic moments.
I did like that their moment of understanding that they finally came to wasn't this big, poignant production of sisterhood and giving each other this long, knowing look, but it was kind of a step in the right direction, but you could see that it would eventually turn into loyalty and sympathy.
Are you talking about their moment in the library or over the autopsy table?
The library is where I really started to see it, because I think Ginny felt like she was under scrutiny and under the spotlight. So I think it was the moment in the autopsy room was Lillian understanding that Ginny is more than Lillian thought she was, but the library is where they really start to harmonize in a very small way, because it's still a little bit antagonistic.
And what I liked about that scene especially was that you finally get to see a little bit of Lillian trying to censor herself and trying to approach Jenny, not necessarily with more kindness, but with at least neutrality, because Lillian immediately goes to snap back, and then there's that long, strange pause. And it's almost Lillian thinking to herself, if you can't say anything nice, say nothing strategy.
And the fact that she's still standing there and is, you know, kind of she doesn't quite know how to tease Ginny back in a way that sounds neutral or even halfway kind. It still kind of comes off as a little mean. And I think Ginny responds to it as if it were that way, but they're beginning to reach a détente, and it's nice to see that.
I guess my point with the Lillian and Jenny relationship is, especially through those two conversations with Bill, Lillian gets to see that Jenny is not just Bill's lapdog, which I think is how she initially viewed Jenny, as this sort of attractive, vivacious secretary who got her thrills out of pulling strings and being under the protection of Dr. Masters. And then once Lillian realizes that Bill isn't necessarily out to undermine Jenny, although I think you could definitely see it that way when he says he wants to be kept in the loop as to Jenny's class schedule. I think she realizes that Jenny is fighting more of an uphill battle than was realized initially. And I think she comes to respect that for what it is.
Yeah, when Jenny first walks into the room when Lillian is going around tagging or, I guess, cataloging the bodies before the class, like, you could see Lillian imagining that Bill has such sway over Jenny that he would send her off to go avoid the class.
And the way that Jenny phrased it, too, it was very much, well, I've done so much work with Dr. Masters. You can almost see Lillian's hackles rising. It was played for comedy, obviously, but Jenny sitting in the middle of class like Hermione Granger with her hand up. Ooh, Professor Snape, call on me.
Do we want to talk about Lillian's presentation?
And how her projectionist falls asleep at the wheel.
Oh, poor Lillian. How quickly did you guess that she was talking about herself at the presentation? Like, did it catch on with you? Or me, it took me until the poignant music started when she was putting the slides away, to be honest, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Well, and that's about the time when I caught it.
The show just, the camera work, the dialogue, the sound, everything, nothing is there to hint at that point. You really have to read between the lines on a level, like most TV shows, they kind of hint at that point. You really don't see it until it outright tells you, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of shows would have sort of given
lingered
us a
on it or
Lillian
something.
sad eyes as no one was listening, and then gone straight to her.
Do you think it would help her case at all, her project, if she had gone to them and said, "Here, this is me. This is what my insides are like. This is what's happening to me right now"?
Honestly, I don't know, because, I'd like to think that if a group of doctors was presented with a colleague who said, "Hey, I'm dying of cervical cancer. This is my pet project. Let's get it funded," I would like to believe it would get funded pretty quickly, but
I think it would be so awkward, especially, like, doubly so because she's a woman and she's had to spend so many years binding up any emotional reaction and shutting herself off that I don't think she'd be able to do it in the first place, just out of necessity, like, out of having to have built up those walls and that armor in order to simply function amongst the other male doctors.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see her necessarily being able to wield that emotional element in a business pitch the way that
Ginny probably would.
Ginny probably could. Yeah, exactly. It's still, it just breaks my heart because I think Lillian was my dark horse character for this season. I love her. I will go to the mat for her. And so this particular storyline just really struck me, especially given that we've spent a lot of time being set up to see her as this antagonist to Ginny. What did you think about her conversations with Bill?
We don't know this about her yet when she's on the elevator with him and she says, "I have 6 months." And she's using doublespeak and she's talking about how long she has to live. And then all of a sudden they get into this conversation about Virginia being her student and Bill just totally tunes her out after that. And I think it was shitty of him to go behind Ginny's back and to go to Lillian and be like, "Hey, let me know if she signs up for any extra classes." If that came to fruition, I don't know what he would do with that information. Like, what could he possibly, like, what would he do?
And see, that's what I was wondering too, because how does that
impact anything?
How does it benefit him?
Just a sense of further control. I think he feels betrayed over the fact that Ginny's been lying to him and not telling him where she goes at night.
I think so too, especially considering so much of it is wrapped up in his really wanting to undertake this sex research together, this physical time together. She's attending classes, someone else is teaching her about anatomy and science, and I almost want to call it jealousy, but I'm not sure that it is jealousy, but it's definitely, there's an element of
Ginny belongs to me and not anyone else.
Yeah, it's so juvenile, and yet I can't quite figure it out.
And this was the episode where there were those promotional shots of Bill and Ginny in a restaurant, like a really nice restaurant, like almost like he took her to Delmonico's, which Ethan mentions later in the episode. And the scene got cut. And it's going to be on the DVD when that comes out. So finally we'll get to see what the hell they were talking about. They just seemed like they were having a very deep, involved conversation at lunch or at dinner, at something. And it was just like it was Bill and Ginny time, and we got that taken away from us, and I'm not okay with that. I am never okay with that.
More Bill and Ginny.
More.
I do like that Lillian gets to cut through some of the Bill Masters' superiority armor here.
She sees right through his bullshit and just calls him on it, which, good for her. And
I love that he goes in with this agenda. It's really the first act of loyalty that we've seen her take on Ginny's behalf, and it thrills me.
But then, of course, she agrees to do it anyway.
Well, and it's kind of funny because the way that she agrees, it's kind of like, fine, you help me, I help you. Do we want to start talking about Bill and Gini since we are slowly moving that way?
Sure. When we start out watching them in the lab, at first it was funny that it looked like he was timing her on what she was saying, on what she was reading off of his notes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns out that he's timing his own refractory period, which is a wonderful indirect look into how their personal participation has advanced. So now they're having sex multiple times a night, and he's got this guise that he's timing himself. And what's great throughout the episode is that his refractory periods keep getting smaller and smaller.
And they always get broken by him talking excitedly about science.
But I think you mentioned earlier that when they're in the lab talking, they're discussing how they can't, or he's discussing how they can't just show the insides of a woman, and this just isn't going to work out. And then he's leaning over their bed and fluffing the pillows and like anxiously trying to get her back into the study room to try to sort of coax her back into, well, we could get some more research done if you wanted.
I mean, I'm just standing over here fluffing pillows for no reason, casually, but if you wanted, I'd be fine with it.
Come over here. Sit on bed with me. Do this.
That scene just absolutely cracked me up, because he's got that crazy hair. They always style him with that sex hair when they want him to be funny and sympathetic, and here he is with the pillows for an awkwardly long time. And then all of a sudden it's, well, I guess we could go for round 2. And Ginny says, I'm sorry, I have something to do. And you kind of see him look at her like, but I just fluffed these pillows.
But I did a thing that was supposed to bring you over here. What are you doing? And it's interesting that they kind of continue the theme of them never quite being on the same page. Like in the previous episode, Ginny wants to hang out, have post-coital dinner, and Bill takes off and he's kind of, ha 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 about it. Now I've got to go hang out with my wife. And in this one, he's like, come over here and sit on the bed with me. Hey, fluffing pillows. And she's like, oh yeah, no, I've got to go home. Oh, and you wanted to spend more time with Libby, didn't you?
Well, and it's funny because even now, in last week's episode, we had them disjointed and at ends. But we got to see them in the sex scenes really find that harmony and finally get that rhythm, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But now we don't even get that. It's just them sort of the closest we get to that kind of meeting of the minds is when they're talking about the scientific advances, and even then that gets interrupted half the time by Bill saying, well, no, refractory period's over.
Yeah, it's always, hey, I'm back. Okay, we can go ahead and talk about Lester now if you want.
Let's do it. I love Lester.
Lester is my personal favorite. If anything, if this were Game of Thrones, I would be legit style upset if something happened to him. Like he's my buddy.
We also got our first Twilight reference in this series when
yes, it's my favorite. Oh.
Dr. Masters, I thought you were Nosferatu.
It's the best thing ever. Lester, the great film realist, something. I don't know what he calls himself in a later episode. He's stylistically similar to Hitchcock. We know that much.
Well, and I love that the directors he mentioned when he brings the modified Ulysses to the lab, and he brings up George Méliès, Orson Welles, and Hitchcock, all 3 directors who, in some sense, push the boundaries of what film was supposed to be, either as an art form with the subject matter or just technologically speaking, and I just thought that was hilarious.
Both things that Lester will wind up doing in his directorial debut.
With Bede St. Marie.
Oh, the best.
I think my favorite part about that scene was Ginny and Bill are almost having to walk both Jane and Lester through the motions. Okay, buddy, here's your chair.
How else could they have gotten him involved, though? Like, honestly, Lester's the kind of innocent who, if they'd tried to talk him into it, he would have run screaming in the opposite direction.
Oh, there's even Ginny at her best would never have been able to convince him that this was something he needed to do.
One really funny thing about that scene, Jane first lays down on the table, and then it cuts to Bill pushing Lester down into his seat. All of a sudden, Ulysses, like she's already got Ulysses up inside her, and I don't know if she's got her hand on it because you couldn't see it because it's obscured by her legs, but Ulysses like moves.
No, I saw.
You watch it kind of undulate, and you're like, ugh, what is going on?
No, I saw that too. It made me laugh.
Ulysses just looks like it weighs about 10 pounds. Like, how...
Girl's been doing her Kegels, is all I can say. I thought this was really cute, actually.
It was a sweet friendship, and it was a nice way for Libby to get something to do that wasn't just her feeling awful and having existential crises about her apparent inability to have children.
And I was worried at first that it was going to turn into an affair, either that, she was going to be attracted to him or that somehow they would end up having some sort of one-off interaction.
That didn't even, it wouldn't be true to the show, historically.
No, and I absolutely agree, and that's why I'm so glad that it didn't happen, because, again, on a lesser show, this would have been... oh, now we have this beautiful affair, this very brief moment in time, and, now I'm pregnant. Is it Bill's? Is it Walter's? You don't know. I'm glad that they resisted melodrama.
They took a very unflinching look at the reality of it. I mean, obviously she didn't think that he would be black talking to him over the phone. She doesn't try to correct the doctor when he calls him the boy. And I'm hoping that they really do this justice in season 2, because I think Libby is exactly the kind of person who could find this whole new route, this whole new plot line to take up. And that could open to the show focusing on a group of characters like in an Orange is the New Black kind of way. Like, she's the segue, but we don't want to make her be the entire point of addressing this new set of characters.
She wouldn't be the one riding on her white horse,
exactly,
necessarily. But, I would love for them to do something like that, especially because, jumping ahead to the last episode, when she delivers her baby and the way that plays out, I think you could build a good case for her to get involved with civil rights and with the black community in St. Louis, and I would love to see that happen.
I think that's where we're going, and I think Bill is going to wind up working at a black hospital.
Oh, I could see that too. That would be interesting.
Because one of the trailers had him as the lone white person in a room full of black doctors.
Can Bill's ego handle being the only white guy?
I think we know that it cannot. I think we know how this is going to play out, and it's going to be not good. It was sweet to see her hang out with him and her, be excited about his ability to dance and reminiscing with him, and kind of these two melancholy people come together and have a nice time together, and for it to just be, like you said, just a very friendly, affectionate, not in a romantic sense, but just kind of affectionate little friendship.
Well, and I was thinking, too, after I watched the episode, I think the fact that Libby does find this friendship and she's got something to do other than either sit around the house with her knees to her chest or wander around in a daze waiting for Bill to come home and spend time with her. I was wondering, just on a purely hypothetical level, if that affected her hormonal level and her chances, essentially, of having a pregnancy that sticks, because obviously, when you're healthy and when you're relatively stable, that's when those things tend to go better. And so I think this certainly helped her have a better foundation than lying on her back for 18 hours being miserable and terrified that she would never get pregnant and never have a child.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. And I think when you first mentioned that, I just jotted something down, and I guess I was thinking of Mad Men when Betty decides to take up horseback riding to try to induce a miscarriage.
Right.
And the fact that this show, this episode really does kind of turn that on its head. Libby's up, she's active, she's dancing, she's twirling around, she's leaning way, she's being dipped way far backwards. And I think if Bill knew about this, he would probably tell her, well, no, if you really want the pregnancy to stick, you should be still and lie in bed, because that's what the literature and that's what the research says. But yeah, rather than have the show question whether it's good for her to be moving around and kind of hint that would damage the child, yeah, you're right. It is kind of indirectly presented as healthy and normal and good.
I kind of liked that idea that Libby, through this sort of joyous expression and this little friendship, she's able to really do the thing that matters most to her, which is conceive another child. Do we want to talk about Bill and Barton?
Yeah, sure. We can briefly talk about them.
How Barton is awkwardly stalking the parking lot, waiting for Bill's hat to
looking
be visible.
Out through the blinds, trying to see who's out there, holding up a pair of binoculars.
I guess when I first watched it, I didn't realize just how awkward it was, because here comes Barton sprinting outside, basically, Bill, hey, buddy, hi, how are you? By the way, I need a favor. I loved how awkward it was, and yet at the same time, it was such a, not deep conversation for them. Obviously, it is deep because of the subject matter, but... It
was subtextual in a weird way.
It was, and there was a lot more friendship there than we've seen since, really, the blackmail incident began.
Well, and Barton comes right out and says that the fact that you're still standing here tells me that you're still on my side.
And I think it's important, too, not only that, Barton acknowledging it, but Bill saying out loud, I'm sorry, I wish I could be of more help, I just don't know. I don't know what to tell you, I don't know who else to refer you to, I don't know how this could be solved, if it can be solved, and so I think that's important, too. They've had conversations about this in very circuitous, I won't call them discussions, but I think this is the most honest conversation they've had to date, and it does show, and it is able to bring their friendship, I think, onto more even ground.
Yeah, definitely.
Even generally, even discounting the blackmail.
Yeah, definitely. Should we go ahead and jump to the last scene?
Let's jump to the last scene.
So in some interviews for season 2 that Lizzie Kaplan did, she mentioned that this scene was really, they talked a lot about how they wanted to stage this, and this was meant to look as though she and Bill were on a date at the drive-in, much the same way, and she didn't mention this, but obviously there's a parallel here to the way Barton and Margaret go to the drive-in, only this feels more youthful, with less cynicism, less honesty, a lot less honesty, because Bill even says right to her face, it's your decision. Obviously it isn't, since he's going behind her back. He is manipulating things behind the scenes. But again, like we said, I don't know what effect he thinks he's going to have by knowing which classes she plans to take. She does come right out and say, like, it's almost apologizing, like, maybe I really won't take any classes. You're being so nice to me. I'll just stick with you.
Yeah, and I was wondering, because in the earlier scene when he tries to pretend that he knows nothing about any Dr. DePaul or anatomy classes.
Which was so stupid. Like, why didn't he just say, I met Lillian today and she mentioned how you were taking a class. I think it's great. You could have told me about this. Like, I guess, I don't know what it is that prevents him from just being cool about this. Like, I don't understand.
When it's almost like he's expecting some sort of show of loyalty, and then when Ginny obviously doesn't even take that bait right away, she sort of tries to casually brush it off.
She's waiting for that other shoe to drop. She's waiting for him to start yelling at her.
And I think these two scenes, Bill is so intent on presenting himself as the good guy. He wants Jenny to see him as someone who is generous and
worth being loyal to.
Yeah, and encouraging. Yeah, exactly. I think the first date dynamic in the last scene is so funny, because even though Bill is not necessarily working with an agenda, it's not like he's scripting their conversations, but there is that subtext. He still has that boyish awkwardness to him, and the terrible sex hair, and not manic demeanor, but it's much more excited and much less reserved than we see him even at the beginning of the episode.
Well, and it's an interesting contrast how in both situations he lies, but in the second one it's much less of a direct lie, so he comes off far better in the second one. It comes off as more natural, smoother, like he can genuinely be the nice person.
Well, in that one, it kind of comes off as the kind of lie that you would tell if you're on a first date. It's very easy, and it's very almost surface. Whereas before in the other conversation, the other scene,
he was constructing. He was doing the classic liar's blunder of giving way too much information. Rule number 1: you keep it vague.
Oh yeah, I mean he's standing in the doorway, looking weird and sounding weird, and it's just not going to work.
Just can't be cool. In the second one, yeah, and man, he just. When he can hit that sweet spot, he can just lay it on in a way that I don't think he even realizes.
No, I don't think he knows he's being genuinely charming, but it's definitely working for him. And for Virginia as well.
Yeah, and what I like about this show is that he smiles so rarely, but when he when he does, it has value, it has weight and meaning.
Yes. Well, and I think the tone of voice, too, here also helps his case, because it's
1940s Bill.
Exactly. It's young Bill. It's that eager, strange little dude who studied rabbits in a hole, and here he is. He's back again during the refractory period.
Oh, we find out how old Jane is.
Oh, I missed that completely.
I noticed this on the previous episode when Ginny is typing up... And actually, no, it was in episode 4 when Bill goes to look for George's study card. The numbering system that they have in place is the letter M or F for male or female, then it has a dash, and then it has their age, and then it has number they're assigned when they're entered into the system. So it's a chronological, so it's like you're the first person, you're the 106th person to be entered into the system.
Huh.
Jane is 26 years old.
Well.
And Bill is 42. And
see, I love that. I did not catch that at all.
George is like 34 or something, and I think Ginny... You don't see Ginny's card, but I think she's 9 years younger than Bill, so I think she's like 33. What a sweet little ending this was, and yeah, you're right. It was really cute that he was so charming and boyish.
I'm telling you, to the hair.
It really is. They style his hair up all fluffy when he's charming and sweet and sympathetic, and when he's angry and being a total asshole and a terrible person, they flatten it against his scalp. When he is good, he is very, very good, and he has little pockets of hot air that come out of his head and make his hair inflate. And when he's angry, it all sucks inward.
He's a hair pump.
He does.
All right. So that is the end of our episode for today. And as always, if you've got any questions or any comments or anything you want us to cover next time, send us a fan mail and we will do our best. This has been Masters of Podcasting.
Thanks for listening. See you all next time.
Bye.